With the launch of the PMDG 737 and the Phoenix A320, is Microsoft Flight Simulator finally ready for prime time? Hey everyone, it's Hotchmania, and today I'm talking about whether or not Flight Simulator is really ready to be your primary sim. It's a great question because ever since Microsoft Flight Simulator came out, there have been sky high, see what I did there, expectations when it comes to this sim because of course there's been a lot of hype around it. Its initial debut was really cool, but obviously a lot of the aircraft and a lot of the issues with the simulator kind of held it back, and many of us went back to using P3D or X-Plane. But now it seems like Microsoft Flight Simulator is finally ready to turn the corner. And I think the proof is in the fact that we're finally seeing some really good airliners. The general aviation aircraft for the sim have been pretty much okay and pretty good in most part. There's been a number of highlights, but the airliner aspect of it has really held the sim back. But now we're having some really quality payware aircraft come out. And so many, including myself, have been wondering, is it now the time to move forward with Microsoft Flight Simulator? And if you're like me, you're also wondering the same thing. And today I wanted to break down whether or not it actually makes sense to go in that direction. I've largely made the jump to Microsoft Flight Simulator, but there's a handful of issues that truly are remaining that you should be aware of before you decide if the time is right. Chief among them, number one, is the aerodynamics are still not very realistic. Ever since it debuted, the aerodynamics, the flight model, if you will, for the GA aircraft have been pretty good. But for airliners, yeah, it hasn't really been all that great because there's not a lot of realism to it. Now, to their credit, I know that the folks at Phoenix did a lot of work on their flight model to make it a little bit better. But generally speaking, if you were to hold up the different simulators that are out there and look at their flight models, I think most people would come to the conclusion that Microsoft Flight Simulator is not quite there yet. Now, this has been an ongoing issue for a while, and certainly the developers over at Asobo are well aware of it, and they're looking to improve it. And I think that, like many aspects of the game, it's going to continue to move forward as time goes on, and things will improve. But for right now, it's not exactly the real deal when you get up in the air. But in my opinion, it's good enough. Again, it kind of boils down to how important is it for you to have like truly authentic real world situations in the air, or are you okay with just kind of a facsimile of it? That remains to be seen. Now, while I can live with the aerodynamic and the flight model, the ground handling is still really bad. Have you ever tried taxiing at a high speed in an airliner on the ground in Microsoft Flight Simulator? It's like being on ice. One of my favorite examples of this is when you land with the Phoenix A320, and as soon as you touch down and you start twisting that joystick even a little bit, all of a sudden you're whoop whoop all over the place, right? The ground handling is still an issue that needs to be sorted out. It's not a big deal because how much of the sim are you actually taxiing at a large high speed? Not that much, but it is an issue there. Next up is the touch zones. And this is, I'm talking about any of the switches or whatnot. You may notice a lot of times you're fighting the sim in order to turn a switch on or off because you just can't get your mouse into the click zone. This has been an issue since day one as far as I know. It's not a major deal. This is probably a smaller bug, especially compared to the first two issues I raised, but it does exist. It is annoying. And you'll end up doing that zoom in, zoom out. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, now let me move around here and finally get the right angle. In fact, speaking of angles, it's actually better, in my opinion, to try to turn switches on or off from an angle as opposed to actually being directly above or below the switch. For some reason, it just seems to work a whole lot better. Probably my number one issue, the thing that really gives me pause when I turn on Microsoft Flight Simulator, is the real risk of a crash to desktop. Every simulator has this problem. This is not just a Microsoft Flight Simulator issue. Certainly X-Plane crashes and P3D crashes. But in those sims, there's an autosave function for a lot of the airliners, especially the ones you might fly for a really long time. There is no worse feeling in the world than doing a flight, getting halfway through it, a third of it, two-thirds of it, almost done with it, and then a crash to desktop right at the end. It is just bad news bears all around, and it's still very much a real risk. Again, without a true autosave function, that can really be a problem. And certainly if you're going in Microsoft Flight Simulator, you should be aware of that. Next on my list of problems with Microsoft Flight Simulator that might keep you back, the camera system still is awful. So compared to, again, other simulators, coming over to Microsoft Flight Simulator, boy, setting up custom cameras is a real pain in the butt. You know, I don't know why they made it so difficult, but it just seems like it's arbitrarily more difficult for no apparent reason compared to other sims. And most other sims, you just hop in, start using your arrow keys, you can move around. In here, you've got to reconfigure a bunch of commands in order to make it work. I don't know why it's like this, but it is what it is. And certainly the camera angles, I mean, once you get it set up, you do a little bit of work, it's okay, but it shouldn't be this difficult to do cameras, in my opinion. So it's still very much an issue. And I think the other major issue that might stop you from going to Microsoft Flight Simulator are the serious issues in performance. Now, this isn't just one particular aircraft. This is the entire sim. Certainly, large frame rate drops, frequent stutters, and an extremely slow loading screen when you pop open the sim for the first time are really aggravating. It's more hit or miss, and in some cases, you may or may not run into these problems, but when you do, it's super annoying. Now, this comes with time, and certainly I know the developers are aware of this problem, but it's been around for a while, and it's not quite a well-oiled machine, as it were. So if you are going to be flying with a Microsoft Flight Simulator, you may run into situations in which, you're going to have poor performance at certain airports around the world, or just simply issues in terms of the overall performance in the sim altogether. Now, if all these issues seem menacing and just terrible, and why would I ever go over to this sim? I thought the same thing, but in my opinion, these are issues you can live with. Like any simulator, there are going to be problems. No simulator is perfect, and the scenery that you get in Microsoft Flight Simulator is absolutely amazing and truly makes up for a lot of these issues. Personally, I've made the jump over to Microsoft Flight Simulator from X-Plane primarily because I'm willing to overlook some of those issues in exchange for truly amazing visuals that you get within the sim. Overall, I generally am of the opinion that ultimately we're in the simulator to, have a more realistic experience of what it's like to fly an airplane. It's not going to always be study level. Again, I've said this before. I think study level is a misnomer. I don't think such a thing exists, but I do believe there is a fine line between acceptable and ridiculous. And Microsoft Flight Simulator has definitely moved in the right direction. The arrival of really good payware aircraft, the last couple of sim updates that have truly introduced bug fixes that address a number of bigger issues that used to exist, and of course, a much more burgeoning developer community in which you have a lot more add-ons and fixes to help overlook and gloss over some of the major issues, for me, have made it worthwhile. But I want to hear from you in the comments. Is it time? Have you made the decision to move to Microsoft Flight Simulator as your primary sim? Not the only one you fly necessarily, but your primary. Let me know in the comments below. If you haven't, I also want to hear what's holding you back specifically, because I think that's really important to talk about. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on your notifications. We're really trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, so every subscription helps. By the way, subscribing is totally free to do the channel, so please hit that button. It would really make a difference to me. This has been Hotchmania, and we'll talk again real soon.